All right, welcome back, everybody. So we hope you had an opportunity to check out our sponsors, our exhibitor booths, and got something to eat and something to drink. I'm really excited about our next panel discussion, and I know more folks will be coming in. A couple of programming notes with this panel. Due to acts of God and illness, we've lost a couple of our panelists. Toyin Ajayi, unfortunately, came down with an illness, not COVID, fortunately, but won't be able to join us. Shannon Young, likewise, lost her voice. Kathy Preston, our Executive Vice President, has been nice enough to pinch hit and will serve as our moderator. And due to the impending storm out in Buffalo, the Assembly Majority Leader, unfortunately, will not be able to make it, but she does send her regrets. So with that, I'm going to ask Kathy to come on up. Ask our panel to each grab a seat, and I'm going to turn the dais and the conversation over to Kathy. So enjoy. We're probably going to go until a little bit after 12. Certainly, as a reminder to folks, if you have questions for the panel, just fill out one of the cards on your table. We'll grab it. We'll bring it up to Kathy, and just looking forward to really entertaining, informative, and engaging conversation. So thank you all for being with us.
Last long.
Thank you, Eric.
Can folks hear me? Yes, okay, it's never a problem. Okay, so thanks, Eric. It's a pleasure to introduce the panelists in today's session. And I'm the understudy, so I'm gonna read from my notes here, so sorry about that. Breaking the glass ceiling means promoting women and people of color to positions where they have the opportunity to shape policy, increase the diversity of leadership in their organizations, and the broader workforce, and ensure that all individuals have access to resources and opportunities. This panel will feature a discussion with women who have achieved leadership roles in government and about the challenges they've faced and their advice for advancing equity and inclusion and expanding the pipeline of future diverse leaders. With us today, we have current Assembly Member and Senator-elect Natalia Fernandez, first elected to the Assembly in 2018 in a special election. She currently represents the Assembly's 80th District in the Bronx. In January, she will join the Senate as the first Latina and person of color representing the 34th District, which includes portions of the Bronx and Westchester. Prior to joining the Assembly, she served in the office of former Assemblyman Mark Jonai in a variety of roles, including Chief of Staff and in the Executive Chamber representing the Bronx. A graduate of Hofstra, she's the daughter of immigrant parents. Her father migrated with his family from Cuba to the Bronx and started his own business painting apartments, while her mother came to the United States from Colombia. Next, we have Julissa Gutierrez, Chief Diversity Officer of New York State. In that position, she designs and implements statewide programs and initiatives, increasing diversity within the state's workforce and increasing participation of women and people of color in all areas of state government. She's led the state's effort to raise the minimum wage, implement the strongest paid family leave program in the nation, pass GENDA, and a lot more. Ms. Gutierrez also has served as leader of New York State's Vaccine Equity Task Force and as Deputy Director of Constituency Affairs for New York State. Prior to joining the state, she served in leadership roles at the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials Educational Fund and the New York City Department of Youth and Community Development. She holds a master's degree in Social Service Administration from the University of Chicago and a Bachelor of Arts in International Relations from the University of Delaware. Finally, we have Tanuja Mohapatra. Tanuja is Senior Advisor to the Department of Financial Services Superintendent Adrienne Harris. Previously, she served as Director of Legislative Affairs for the department and also worked in the New York State Assembly. She received her bachelor's degree from North Carolina State University and her law degree from Catholic University. Welcome to all of the panelists. As a reminder, there are cards on the table for folks who want to ask questions during the course of the discussion. HPA staff will collect your questions, so fill out a card, hold it up, and a member of the staff will come and get it. And please, we want this to be an interactive discussion with this panel. All right, we're going to jump in. So how does the importance of diverse representation at leadership level factor into decision-making on public policy? Start there. Assembly member, go ahead.
This thing's on? Yes? Okay. How diversity affects public policy? Well, in essence, I think all of us, we agree we don't want anybody to be left behind. Maybe sometime years ago, that wasn't intention, but we've been very, very diligent and detail-oriented to make sure that the policy that we put forward is not going to discriminate to communities, it's not going to segregate other communities. So it's really important to have people from the communities that understand the diverse backgrounds that can bring up issues or situations that may not come quickly to mind for the average policymaker. But thankfully, the average policymaker does look like me. I'm very proud to be amongst many, many colleagues. I think we are up to 70 members in the Black, Hispanic, Puerto Rican, Asian caucus, and it's the most ever. So to that is a great testament that we are utilizing our leaders to really represent our communities. And that's through engagement, that's through voter registration, that's through education. And I think from when the legislature first started, and I think there is a photo, you can see that in the assembly once upon a time in the early 1900s, it's all white men. So now it's definitely not like that. But the leaders in place have been able to be a voice to their communities and really represent and speak to the issues that, again, may not be at first glance or recognition.
I agree. I think, times have changed and for the better, for greater representation. And also just, recognizing that diversity is also much more than just race and gender. Diversity includes geography, sexual orientation, disability, ability, and more, veteran status, language, right? For me, I see people are policy, right? And to your point, Senator-elect, I think that we're doing a much more tremendous job nowadays on identifying leaders, either, electing them. For me, for example, to serve the first female governor of New York State has been tremendous. Having someone with an understanding of the importance of being a mother, of childcare, for example. In this last budget, as many of you know, we enacted the largest investment in childcare investments to address what we knew was predated before COVID, but what exacerbated was the need for more childcare. And so, just to have that as an example has served tremendously. And I know that, other elected officials as well have been able to be responsive in that regard. So I think that it's definitely something that we should continue to strive for. And I think at the end of the day, leadership, there has to be a buy-in and a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so for me, I think that in the way that I find myself in this position is also kind of a full circle, being a born and raised Queens girl, and coming from the most diverse county in the country, in the world, some would argue, is very relevant to how I bring my full self to the job that I do every day, right? As a navigator growing up, to my immigrant-born parents, to being a navigator today for diverse communities and constituencies that reach out to me in my office and the governor. So clearly, I think that we should continue to uplift more of these opportunities and support each other.
Well, I guess building on what Jalissa said, Department of Financial Services, the head is the Superintendent Adrienne Harris, and she was appointed by our first woman governor, and Superintendent Harris is the first woman of color to run the Department of Financial Services. And what I would say to you is that when the top changes, it is easier for the culture and openness and for diverse conversation and thoughts. So now that we have a superintendent who has faced her own challenges to get to where she is very, very invested in creating a department where we're having more open dialogue and we're able to share our different viewpoints to get to the best answer. She's also refocused, I think, the department on data-driven, right? So that everybody can have those conversations in a safe way. And more importantly, she is allowing many different staff at many different levels, the rank and file up to the executives, to really express, what may have been seen as challenging viewpoints, but she welcomes the dialogue and she allows that to influence what is going to be answered. And for a regulator, that's very important, right? Because we regulate industry and industry provides products to the public. And so we are going to influence and hopefully work with industry to provide better products for New Yorkers and serve populations that have been left behind before in other ways.
Great answers. Okay. So how do we all support more women and people of color getting into leadership roles?
Pay attention, recognize them, listen to them. I tell many young women, insert yourselves, be in that room, ask the question, and don't be shy to ask whatever question. It's been said, and I don't even want to, okay, it's been said people pay attention to people who participate. And I think that's a very, very true statement. You're there, you care, you're speaking, someone's gonna notice. And if you feel that's certain about a certain idea, topic, push on it, press on it. Try to get people around you to work with you on this, because I believe that no matter what, in whatever room, there's somebody here that has the same interests, the same values, and a very similar goal, and is ready to walk with you to achieve that goal. So for young women and women of color, don't be afraid. This is your space too. And own it. Own the fact that you made it this far. Own the fact that you are in the same room, and utilize it. Speak up, ask the questions, introduce yourselves, and follow up afterwards.
Along with that, I think that some folks also need to receive an invitation or need to be engaged proactively, right? Because we might be just catering to one segment of the population at times, for example, an election, for example, but there's also unengaged folks that are as critical and as important to the conversation, to society's ecosystem. So I do think mentorship, creating pipeline programs, right, ultimately. I think I'm really a fan of that, because I'm a product of that, right? If I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my high school bringing in the Anti-Defamation League, A World of Difference, where I became a peer trainer. And from there, I was able to continue and build those relationships. Right, and so I think building pipeline programs, and so for example, and mentorship programs. So last year on Latina Equal Pay Day, Governor Hochul, we put together a Latina mentoring initiative that is run and administered by the Office of Children and Family Services New York Mentoring Program. To me, that has been amazing, because children, women, I know it was for me. You need to see it to believe it, right? And so for people to see Senator-elect Natalia Fernandez, Cubana, Colombiana, right, is amazing. To me, for example, when I go back to my community back in Queens, and to see all three of my elected officials are all Latinas that look like me, that look like my family, is amazing, for example. So I do think that we need to be intentional about creating these sort of programs. So what I would offer and ask all of you to take away from here is go back to your place of work and create these sort of programs, support them. And remember, it might not just be a pipeline from youth to professional, but could also be within your own workplace, creating an employee resource group, right? How many of you have an employee resource group in your company, in your organization? I see a few hands up, and I think that's a great way to identify leaders, to be strategic about it, to support them. And I think that, again, it also you have to have that leadership buy-in to be committed to not just making it happen, but also backing it up with support services and resources.
So I would just say, building on what Jalissa had just said, actually the Department of Financial Services has ERGs, and we have implemented that. And that has been something that during the pandemic was such a wonderful support system for what I would say our rank and file and our management, and to keep us together. What I would say is I think there's a twofold answer to this. One for management is to say, look at people's experience, right? Everybody who has a resume may not have had the same opportunities because there wasn't a pipeline. And it's about retention. Even within your own corporation, in your own company, think about how are you retaining your talent. And maybe certain staffers just haven't had the opportunity. And I think I'm a prime example of that. I actually was at the Director of Legislative Affairs for over 7 years. I thought after, the superintendent's confirmation, I was going to move on to another career outside of the department. I didn't think I had a path forward. It really was the superintendent who talked to me several times and was like, and noticed that I didn't do just legislative affairs. I actually knew a lot about the department and promoted me to assist her in really restructuring and implementing her vision. But it took someone like her to see that in myself, because I didn't see that in myself. I thought the next role for me was to lobby. And it was a lot of calls and conversations with her. I was a mother. I have a 6-year-old. And I had been tired of legislative affairs and being out all the time. And it really was her really seeing something in me that I didn't see. And it's not because I didn't have a belief. I'm a very strong personality. I just didn't see the pipeline. And so if you're in management, you're going to have to create that pipeline. And that's the thing. So it's not about just recruitment. It's about retaining and then creating pipelines, right? And I think that's one of the most important things. You are going to have to think creatively in management of how to recruit people and create new pipelines for them and actually have them in decision-making roles. And I think that was the biggest thing for me. You know, you have to not only have recruitment of diverse thought, but they have to be able to be in the C-suite in decision-making roles. And I think that's the most important thing.
Okay. Again, great answers. And you just answered several of the questions on the list all at the same time. So that's good. Okay, very good.
Well, if I could just add,
Yes, please do.
maybe, so I did see the, questions ahead. But Tanuja, what your point, you're bringing up, creating this culture. It's one thing about getting people in the door, but like you said, how do you keep them in the company, in the organization, the agency? And it's about creating a culture of belonging. And we've been hearing this a lot more. The realm, the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion is evolving, and it has just since the murder of George Floyd. We've seen this post-reckoning of D&I, explosion of companies hiring more CDOs and equity, et cetera. But we need to sustain that, right? And so in terms of belonging, one thing I would do, and I think I know a number of state agencies have done, is doing climate surveys of their staff, right? Or putting together not just an employee resource group, but also putting together a diversity committee to help advise in general the leadership, but also having that input from rank and file individuals. And so I think that it is important. Equally, the data is very central, right? To ensure that we're figuring out systematically where those inequities are, but then also building opportunities and programs that speak to belonging, right? Even though, something as an observation day of a heritage or of a culture resonates with people in your company or your organization. So I think that will help to instill, opportunities for people to feel belonging and feel seen. So I think that, we're seeing more and more of that. And I think that we're trying to figure out ways in which, make it systemic, but also recognizing that D&I is different for everyone, for every company. You also have to acknowledge that there is, not just different budgets for different agencies and organizations, but different leadership. You're working on different issues. And so it brings up all these different intersecting identities and issues of how to ensure that there's belonging, there's equity, diversity in all those different realms.
Jalissa, I'd like to follow up on the climate survey. How did that come about? And so how did you do all that? Who thought of it? How did you roll that out? What are your next steps after you've got results back? What's next?
So in the case of some of the state agencies where we've worked together on some of the climate surveys, it came about with new leadership, to be honest, right? Folks wanting to know, leaders wanting to know, agency leaders wanting to know what was going on. They've heard this, people were approaching them. And so there's an opportunity when, things are new and there's transitions to kind of survey to hear what was going on, what people would like to hear. ERGs were helpful in creating some of the questions. The diversity committees were also helpful in creating the agency leadership as well. We also gathered some best practices that, have been shared over the last few years. And so those came about. And in terms of implementation, for many of them, it's, the best practice to make it anonymous. So I would also encourage that as a best practice. But also making it very clear that there is going to be follow-up. There is going to be responsiveness to this. And so making it participatory in many different ways, depending, again, on the agency and the culture of the group. And in addition to that, being able to follow up on some of what was raised in those surveys. So if it's about, having a mentorship program within the agency, right, to help folks identify more paths that may not be clear to your experience, perhaps, or also ensuring that, that this is maybe not a one-time climate survey that you're going to want to, test again or survey again, rather not test, within a year, a 6-month mark, based on what programming that you're going to create in response to the survey results. So I think it's been helpful. I think it's been very encouraging when people see these sort of actions being taken place and it being very serious, and people also making sure that they're giving time and resources to allow for this to happen.
Okay, great. So during the pandemic, which we may still be in the middle of, there was a lot of hybrid work, right? Folks were working from home. How did that affect the mentorship and the ability to bring along younger folks to give them support? Was it helpful? Did it hurt? Were there setbacks in terms of folks not being in a room together? When we were all together last night, one of our meetings, one of the things we said is we have got to get back to in-person meetings. We have got to get back where we're talking to one another face to face. But did you find or have you found that the hybrid work environment has hurt your efforts to move forward with diversity?
A little bit. At the beginning of the pandemic, of course, everything shut down. I couldn't have people in my office anymore. And me particularly, I do love to offer that internship opportunity, that workplace experience for a young person so they can get an idea of the future. So this halted that. They didn't get what was going on in old school, I don't know, the old way it used to be, and now learning this new way, that lack of interaction was lost. And much like we heard with our kids in school, that they were losing the ability or the learning time to socially interact with other classmates, I felt like that was actually happening too on the older level. So the beginning of the pandemic, I was out in the streets, food giveaways, PPE giveaways, and I would just tell the kids, come with me, join me, walk with me. And it wasn't a traditional office space where we're sitting calling agencies and helping with the constituent services, but really just talking to people and making sure that they were doing all right, feeling okay, and knew that they still had safety nets around them with my office. So the hybrid life, I think, has definitely changed how we do public meetings, our community board meetings, all the community association meetings. It just felt like a lack of energy, a lack of enthusiasm, a lack of participation, because people get on those Zooms and they turn the camera off and they don't say nothing. And in those meetings, you are interacting with the person next to you. You are then going at the end speaking to one of the speakers for one question that on a Zoom, they may not see your direct message, or they may just turn it off right away and not want to talk to anyone. So I do believe that, yes, we need to get back into the public life, getting into rooms when we meet, when we discuss, because that immediate human interaction, I think, is so important to the progress that we want to make, and the feelings and emotions that we can have in the second that a statement is made or a new idea is proposed. And I think that it's made it harder to, yes, move forward with real movements in ideas and projects. And that we should, get back to the rooms. But I'm not going to lie, the hybrid life has made it easier for me to go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, and I can travel all over the city while sitting in my living room. But for our community's sake, community is important. That connection is so important, and being in the same rooms with people with the same values and interests is important, and we need to get back to that.
So I was going to say, as the Department of Financial Services, when COVID hit, agencies ramped up, actually, right? The government had to start participating, and we had to do a lot of things. So for us, I think, the agency was very nimble, and we quickly switched to Zooms and our team meets and hybrids. I would say in our particular case of external affairs, where in my team, we actually started having daily team meetings. And actually, we ended up interacting a little bit more, because we have individuals who are in Albany, we have individuals that are in New York City. They actually did different things. And we've continued actually these team meetings that we have. And of course, with that, we were able to get to know some of our colleagues better. We actually got to understand what they do within the team. And it actually, at some points, brought the department closer. The other thing we did is quickly our ERGs ramped up. The ERGs became the safety net in, what I would say many agencies like the Department of Financial Services, because our work ramped up. The public needed us, right? A lot of people say, like, state workers, but when COVID hit, the state worker was really pushed. I mean, you had to work. You also had your kids at home like everybody else, and you had to deliver, right? And so I think that's also a way that we also started talking about mental health. We started to have more kind of participation in some of these, what we would say, agency events. We've tried to do different yogas and different things. And I think as a community, we reconnected. But I think to the senator's point, there is something missing when you don't meet each other. And I remember when the superintendent joined us, we're at the tail of COVID, and she was like, well, let me walk around the office, and there was nobody there.
Right.
And so, for her, I give her a lot of credit. For her, she really had to do a hard work of learning an agency. And I think we are also under the belief that, for the DFS community, agency communities, we should start to try to get back into in-person when it makes sense, when it's comfortable for staff. And at the same time, we're looking forward to actually, interacting back with our other colleagues and getting back into the community and serving everybody, because it's really helpful for all of us, right? It's really helpful for our culture to be like that, for our own peace of mind and mental health, to meet each other again and see each other when appropriate and when individuals feel comfortable.
Right.
I agree with both. I think that I'm just sitting here and trying to think. I'm like, we were like completely hybrid, not really, because we were present. For example, some of us have been in the office nonstop, for example. Others have been out in the community, nonstop, like yourself and some of my other colleagues. And so I think that it hasn't, I think that we just have had to be more innovative. It's allowed us to be more innovative. And I have been able to engage with some folks a lot more than I would have. Like, for example, Buffalo or Syracuse. If I can't get out there, we can quickly do a Zoom and on face, but I do think that there is something about finding community, but you can find community anywhere. You can find it digitally. And so we're finding that much more.
Right.
So I agree.
Okay, so it sounds like you all kind of found ways to adjust to the hybrid environment to continue to mentor young women and people of color along the way. Okay. Great. Okay. So what about folks with disabilities? Did hybrid work? Did you find that the folks you work with disabilities, did hybrid work? Was it a setback? Did it work for them? Was it helpful? Was it a little bit of both?
I think it was helpful, but also a setback. I don't think Zoom had closed captions in the beginning of the pandemic, and now we see that they do have that option for closed captions, because it became obvious that those visually impaired or audibly impaired, they needed a way to participate. It was also hard it increased access for some people to now participate, because if traveling was an issue, then they were still able to connect. But it did highlight, where we need to make things more accessible and where things are okay. And I think that was part of the conversation with the governor's briefings at one point, from past to present, to make sure that we have a sign language interpreter in all public speaking areas, because we see that everyone has different needs, and it needs to be added into our presentation, that we want to make sure you hear us, you see us, you can talk to us, and you can follow up with us.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, Governor Hochul appointed the first Chief Disability Officer. Their name is Kim Hill. They're based here in Albany, amazing colleague. With them, we've been working hard in addressing and being more proactive around all disability issues, and also particularly with advocates and other stakeholders. And most recently, just last month, maybe some of you were there, and I hope you were, or can join us in the next time, we held our first Disability Rights and Employment Awareness Month Symposium, where we had all different stakeholders, including employers and individuals with disabilities, coming together for a career fair, in addition to everything else that we discussed that day. And then also we created a virtual career fair. So I think that, again, representation matters, right? And having someone with lived experience, and not just them, but also their team, that have different abilities and disabilities that, within the realm of this work. And we don't think that, the creating a hybrid experience limits. It actually helps and encourages for more accessibility issues, more access to jobs, or more access to the employment space. Oftentimes also you have to think about, working from home might be helpful for those that might have an assistant that helps them, facilitate their communication and their work, because sometimes, you get to think about, it's not just one person. It's a team that gets someone to come together, perhaps, and that's what's needed. So I think that it's only helped to, create more opportunities again and innovate, ways that we can address. And I think that, the Zoom thing was clear because when we were doing meetings, we had to all learn how to do the closed captioning. And I think there's more things that we can be doing. And I think it's about, these conversations allow us to learn what works and what doesn't work. So.
Great. Anything?
No, I mean, as an executive state agency, we are working with the executive, right? So every state agency, and that's kind of what I would say is the great about a state agency. You're part of a system. And so you have leaders, right, who are helping you to focus on that issue as you do your day-to-day work, because it's important, because it contributes to our culture, right? Our staff culture. And so we want our staff to be happy. And I think, that is something that we're trying to do at DFS. We're always told, by our leadership, she wants to hear that people want to work at the Department of Financial Services. It's the best place to work. And so I think, when you are part of a system that is so focused on this and that is driven by the public, we're lucky as an agency, right? We are implementing and always looking forward because we implement. And I think for the private sector, there are certain things that you can learn from state government. There is that idea that state government and state legislators are doing that probably can be implemented in each company and tailored to each company. So I do think that the executive has been at the forefront in the legislature of this.
Great. Okay. So what are some of the lessons you learned earlier in your career that helped you get to where you are today? I mean, we talked about participate, speak up, ask questions, be present in the room, make yourself heard. That's a big one. So what other lessons did you learn along the way that got you where you are? Whoever wants to start.
I would say, I would say for myself, I was like, and I know Delissa always hears this from me, but be the outlier, right? I had to learn quickly that I was an outlier. I am South Asian. My parents are immigrants from India, typical background. I ended up working with Assemblyman Nick Perry, now the ambassador. I worked in his community. I married into the community. And when I got to the Department of Financial Services, what I learned is that my experiences were an outlier, right? And those in the agency, some had those experiences, but they weren't in a role where they spoke about it. Their role was something else. So I had to learn to be comfortable to be an outlier in the room. And quite frankly, as a South Asian woman, took a lot of people aback because they're used to seeing someone as a technocrat, right? South Asians are technocrats. Right, we get in, we kind of build things for you. And what I would say is, define yourself. And then you have to learn that people may not accept that definition of yourself, but you have to continue. So it was very interesting. So when I got into a room, it was like the system would take it back, right? Not individuals because they had problems, but they were like, you're South Asian, you're a technocrat. And I said, no, I'm part of the policy making team. I am part of the group that knows what communities want. And not just my community, because every time I walked into the room, I bring in not the South Asian community, but I bring in every single other minority community, and sometimes others, right, that are left and not at the table. And I learned that because I did work in Assemblyman Nick Perry's district, East, Brooklyn, East Flatbush, right, East New York. So I brought those constituents, those peoples, and his experiences to the table. And you just have to be comfortable to be the outlier. Don't look for validation.
I love it.
I agree with that. I had to really think about my journey right now sitting here, because I started as a volunteer. I got my job as a staffer, then chief of staff, and so on to here. But 10 years ago, when I was that volunteer and staffer, you would find me in the corner just taking notes, maybe just walking around the edges of the room, and very shy, just believing that this wasn't really a place for me to speak. This wasn't really my place to speak up. And to another point, I really do want to thank the mentors around me in my time who said, no, what are you doing? You have talent, you have skill, get in there, go ahead, speak. And pushed me to get to that point where I did know who I was, and I knew my place, and I was confident in it. And so as I've gone through this journey with the Senate district, which is a much bigger area of the Bronx, now into Westchester County, which isn't entirely new to me, but it did put me in places that I never was before. Deliberate bigotry, deliberate racism, and deliberate misogyny that I was not the person for this position. But I would say the last 10 years helped me build up that grit and tough skin to just keep pushing through. And like, all right, you may not think that, but I'm gonna go to the next 10 people and they might think something different. And have that optimism, know your worth, know who you are, know your talents, and place yourself where you know that you can be helpful to the people around you. And I think that's how you become a senator.
Yes, I agree with both as well. And I think for me, I learned early on, and relationship building is key, right? And particularly in government and in politics, of course. But I like the saying that goes, connect before you collect. True inclusion work is about building those relationships, building that trust with individuals, and not only going to them in time of need or when you want something, but truly, connecting with people, learning about them. And so I think when just going back on the, when I learned a lot from my colleagues and my peers when we were on Zoom, because you see families, you see what art they have in the back, or how the living room table is set up or not set up. So I think that these times, and we're living through so many multiple moments, right? That I think that it weighs a lot on us, right? And this work that we do, and I would say that all of you do in the healthcare space, right? It weighs on us, and it's exhausting work. And so for me, it's about relationship building, not just because of the information and the sharing of best practices and whatnot, but it's also about building that community and being intentional about having that support system, and having those mentors. So again, I think it's really about, and I'm glad that, I was able to learn from my mentors early on, but it's something that I didn't know about it at home. Growing up, my parents couldn't navigate for me and tell me, go to this CUNY or go to this SUNY. I went out of state. Why? Because I didn't know about CUNY and SUNY, and I only learned about, UD because of my college counselor, and I applied and I got the best financial aid package, really is where I decided to go. But my life could have been totally different if my parents knew about CUNY or SUNY, or they knew about other opportunities, or if they knew about the labor union and the strength that it has in New York State. They didn't know any of that because in their country, in Colombia, none of that was trustworthy. And so now, being here, I think that, again, it's a testament to my upbringing, not just, it's a combination of my parents, it's a combination of my mentors and the environment around me that was able to don't think any less of yourself, ask those questions, don't be shy. But it's because we were, kind of not forced, but we learned, we had to. They'd be like, go over there and go ask that lady, how can you get in that line? And I'm like, Mommy, we don't have to wait online, let's just go in the front, because you're kind of naturally,
Imposter syndrome.
Yeah. And, that's
Yes.
another thing.
The imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
That's what I had once upon a time.
Yeah.
Because
That's heavy.
That's heavy. And to that point, my mother was the same. She was an undocumented immigrant in her early years here. And forever, everything was just make sure they're happy. Don't disrupt, what's going on here, because, we're lucky to be here. And yes, I could say I'm lucky to be in these spaces and whatever, but it took time for me to realize that I'm just like everybody else here. That, okay, yeah, we came from a different background and different upbringing and different language, but that doesn't mean that I don't care about a safe community. It doesn't mean that I don't care about good education for my kids. But my parents kind of had that idea that we're fortunate enough just to be in the country, so let's not get in the way of anything else.
Let's not cause any trouble.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's not cause any trouble. So that was my first feeling being in this world, okay, I'm kind of not supposed to be here. Let me not really ask my questions. But it took time, and it took mentors and supporters and seeing others do it that I realized that, okay, this imposter syndrome really needs to go out the window, because we do deserve to be here. We have a place, we have a voice, and it's with you.
I mean, I think to build on that, as a South Asian, it was similar imposter, but I think my parents, were both professors, and where I came from, it was, well, you didn't experience the hardship, so you shouldn't fight, right? Where do you sit in this room? Mm-hmm. But then I realized, and it really came from my parents, quite frankly, where they were raised in India during the time of, independence, and Gandhi is a big influence, and Gandhi influenced Martin Luther, and they came here because of the idealism. And so my parents were like, you have to vote. And when I got into politics, it was just one of those things of like, that's not what we do, right, as a community. And then the question is, where do you fit into the conversation? And my parents definitely pushed me, and I'm, like I said, I married into Brooklyn, I married into a Jamaican family, but I think it was my Indian parents that pushed me to say, don't sit on the sideline, you have to be an ally, right? You cannot sit on the sideline if you see something that's happening. It is not happening to someone that could not be you, right? We're not different people. So what happened to George Floyd could be any American. And so, they really supported me in moving into like what I would say off beaten path of politics and working in this as a lawyer. Because I think you have to, if you are not of a community, you have to learn to be an ally. And part of learning an ally is to learn to listen and not place your own experience on someone else's experience. To validate someone else's experience and say, you know what, this may be happening and this is happening. Not prove it to me, but it is happening, and how do I help? I think that is something that, many of us who probably have been in different situations or have been, maybe didn't have the hardest path forward. We all have our challenges, but if you want to support a community, is to learn the community from the community and then advocate for that community the way they would, not the way you think they should based on your experience.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. So how should this audience, folks that are here today, think about their own roles and accountability for building and creating a more inclusive environment in their own organizations?
I would start off by telling everyone, it's not a one-person job, first and foremost. It needs to be embedded, D&I needs to be embedded in all of your business functions. And yes, you could and should have a diversity czar, committee, leadership, but you have to be, as a leader, the one to ensure and hold others accountable and bring in, this D&I perspective into all the work that you're doing. So I just want to remind folks, it's not a one-person job. It's not only up to the Chief Diversity Officer to bring up these conversations, to do a climate survey. It should be part of your everyday business transactions and functions, not just in representation, but supplier diversity, for example. So I would just start off with, it's not a one. I repeat that because people always just go to the CDO or go to, and that's not the case.
I would say work on the inside, work on the outside. Yeah. So within yourself, yes, everything she said. And on the outside, insert yourself into underserved communities, insert yourself and be present in areas and communities, demographics that you don't see your organization having served in the past. That way, it's seen on the outside that you care about us, and it's also then seen on the inside that you want the inside to look like the outside. That make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think for me, I would take it more, a little bit back to a regulator, right? So I think, companies have to be profitable, right? And so when I think about it, we need to start having the right conversations regardless. As you are doing exactly what Jalissa and the Senator are saying, you yourself have to raise these questions. And for us, similar to everyone else, we do commercial insurance. And we talk about, but when you talk and hear about diversity and minority communities and Black women, all of a sudden it shifts to, right? We shift to Medicaid. We need to start having conversations, right? Every community is not necessarily being downtrodden. They're members of the community that are participating, they're earning money, and that there's profitable for the company to have those conversations. So like commercial health care, quality of care, right? Are people who pay for the same health insurance getting the same care, right? So it's about the healthcare system. It's not a one-person job, but it's profitable. And I think the other thing is start to have the conversation open-ended and know that there isn't maybe a solution for one thing. It may be a systematic solution and change is incremental, right? I think that's what it is, and it is profitable to have these conversations. It's not going to lead you into a bad direction. You actually probably will be doing better and have a healthier company and then attract the talent you want.
Very well said.
Well, this session was amazing. For me, the takeaway is, be an outlier, connect before you collect, work on the inside, work on the outside. We couldn't have asked for a better conversation. Please join me in thanking our panel. And thanking Kathy for stepping in at the last minute.
Thank you, Kathy. This was fun.
So with that, we're almost at the lunch break. Before I send you off for lunch, I'd like to ask Tim Conroy, the National Vice President for Government and Healthcare Partnerships for Mom's Meals, to come on up. He's going to provide a couple of minutes worth of remarks before we let you off for lunch, and then we'll be back in this room around 12:45 for our conversation, Understanding Universal Health Care and What Are the Options. So, Tim.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's kind of ironic the food and nutrition company is keeping you from lunch, so I will try to be fairly quick here. Thank you to the New York Health Plan Association. Honored to be a sponsor here. We wanted to highlight a couple just discussion points on food insecurity during the pandemic. It was very dynamic, the challenges that a lot of New Yorkers faced. So as a mission-driven organization, we wanted just to highlight some of those statistics and really talk real quickly before lunch just about, some opportunities in New York, some of the stats that we're seeing, and some of the innovation pathways that are going to be placed in front of us real quickly here. So without doing that first, I wanted to highlight real quickly, food insecurity rates were on the rise during the pandemic. Obviously, that was throughout the country, but specifically in New York. We have several community-based organizations here today. God's Love is one, several others. I wanted to highlight them if we could give them a round of applause. They were on the front line of a lot of the work to help New Yorkers eat healthy and balanced meals during the pandemic. So thank you for that. But with this, and I wanted to highlight a few quick points real quick. We're seeing an opportunity for integration between Medicare, home and community-based services, Medicaid, and the aging networks. And New York's a great example of some places where opportunities are starting to occur. One of those is with 1115 waivers. The health plans do a great job of overseeing the MLTC program. Waiver programs are where a lot of meal programs exist for individuals throughout the state. There's also the in lieu of service benefit, IOLS benefit. You're seeing a lot of health plan opportunities to provide meals and programs like that to New Yorkers throughout the state. Again, these are aging individuals, dual eligible individuals, younger disabled populations. All of these programs that we're going to see over the next few years are critically important to combating food insecurity and driving health and well-being for the population throughout the state. I mentioned earlier as well the Aging Network. They do a lot of great safety net programs around aging issues throughout the state, and both in New York City and throughout the upstate and the rest of the state. It's very important that all these programs integrate, and as we're seeing more modernization opportunities in the Aging Network, we're really excited to see those things settle for New Yorkers. And last but not least, we're part of something we want to kind of highlight and celebrate today, the Food as Medicine Steering Committee. All of these programs that we're talking about, trying to find practical solutions so that New Yorkers can access healthy food, consume healthy food, and promote a lot of the things, not only their well-being, but reduce a lot of unnecessary costs and inequities in the healthcare system that we're all experiencing. So we're really excited about the steering committee to be a big part of that. And I mentioned a few stats, and as you all are familiar with, the HCBS program in New York through the MLTC program, only 1.33% of New Yorkers are eligible for that program. So the importance of these other innovations is critical as we go into the new year here, with statistics showing that almost 11% of New Yorkers faced either consistent or intermittent food insecurity. That is an easy problem that all of us working together, collaborating around this innovation, right, partnering together at the community-based level can make an impact in food insecurity for New Yorkers. So with almost a little bit more than 1 in 10 New Yorkers facing food insecurity, the point of these programs is to provide that practical opportunity to solve that. And last but not least, as we close out here, we asked for some stories from some of our partners throughout the state. We got a lot of lived experience from New Yorkers. Our good friends at Elderwood gave us a few as well, but there's too many to list. We're in booth 22 over here on the side. Come by and share your stories as well as health plans, as community-based organizations, as part of the Aging Network. And again, identify how we can create pathways through this innovation to promote the health equity that we're talking about and reduce that number from 1 in 10 down to much less than it is. But these are our aging New Yorkers that don't have access. They may have chronic conditions. If an individual goes to the hospital and they're malnourished, they're going to stay in the hospital longer. That ER access and use will be higher. These are younger New Yorkers that are disabled and starting to get chronic conditions and have an exacerbation from those. Food and nutrition and that general health and well-being are foundational to controlling some of those costs in the system, and again, promoting the equities that we're talking about and the health and well-being of New Yorkers throughout the state. So that is it. We're going to let you go to lunch, but thank you again. We're proud to be a sponsor here. Enjoy your lunch, and we appreciate all the great work you're doing. Looking forward to great things next year.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Tim. We appreciate your organization's support. So it's lunchtime. Go out and enjoy a meal of food. We will be back here around 12:45 for our next panel discussion, Understanding Universal Healthcare. What are the options? Thanks, everybody.